Hey, it's Michael J. And since a lot of my subscribers latched onto my channel because of my classic film content, I thought I would talk about why do I love classic film? You know, not all of my content is that, though. It's a mixed channel. I do some stuff about my life in the theater, some of my travel, some of my just living in Sacramento now. When I started the channel, it was about living in New York, but now I'm in Northern California, so it's somewhat about that. And those videos are fun to make, but, you know, I don't get a lot of views there. The views seem to all be about the classic film content. So I thought, maybe I should talk about why I love classic film. Now, I should define this. I think I'm talking about the silent era, the 20s, up through the 60s. Now, there's people who look at the 1970s as its own classic film era, and there's a lot of fans there. But it's sort of the new era. After the studio system collapsed or changed, however you want to put it, there was a new wave of cinema going on in the 1970s. And then I think it feels like we got back to the kind of movies we remember as being classic films once we get into Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., Indiana Jones, basically Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas. They started out being sort of, you know, gritty filmmakers, but then the studios gave them a lot of money and they made these glorious, cinematic, fun movies, you know, that seem to me now as, well, it represents a new era, like we'll call it the end of the 70s and the 1980s. But what I really want to focus on is that golden era of Hollywood during the studio system between the 20s and the 60s. Now, the 70s, as I remember it, was a kid growing up, and classic films you could see on the big screen were the Disney films, because the Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights did not show them very often. Sometimes. And you certainly got film clips that introduced you to all of those characters from those classic animated films that Walt Disney produced personally. But you actually went to the movies to see Pinocchio and Bambi and Fantasia and Snow White. And they were on a 7-year rotating basis. But you got some Disney film that was a classic at Christmas time, in the spring, and something in the summer. And they'd pair it with some sort of a new comedy like Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo or The Apple Dumpling Gang, you know. And so they'd have their new product mixed in with the enticement of a great old animated feature. So that was the 70s. But you know what else? My gateway into classic films, besides The Wizard of Oz, and we all know, we all watched The Wizard of Oz every year. And during my childhood, it was always around Easter time, and you had to watch The Wizard of Oz. I think internationally, we all had to watch The Wizard of Oz. That was the only time you ever saw it. It wasn't replayed on other channels, you know. You know, when I was growing up, there was 3 channels, networks, and then PBS, so 4. And then there was ultra high frequency channels. And these were local channels that didn't have a far reach, but they would usually show, like my local channel 40, which was out of Sacramento, about 45 minutes away from where I lived in Placerville. They showed reruns of TV shows, especially I Love Lucy. And this I Love Lucy counts into why I love classic film, because I Love Lucy had guest stars, Hollywood guest stars on all the time, especially that season when they're in Hollywood. There's a new movie star in every single episode. And so, you know, I know and love the William Holden episode. Then I see a commercial on Channel 44, Sunset Boulevard with William Holden, and I think, I correlate the things. I go, oh, William Holden from I Love Lucy is in this movie. I think I'll watch it. And then I'm sucked in by Sunset Boulevard. And also the Looney Tunes cartoons. They would play them for an hour after school at 3 o'clock on this same Channel 40, and there was quite often caricatures of movie stars in those old 1940s cartoons, and I think I knew about Katharine Hepburn as a caricature in a Looney Tunes cartoon before I ever saw one of her movies.
Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?
I'm so terribly sorry, but confidentially, it stinks.
The calla lilies are in bloom again.
So, you could see Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers and James Cagney. And I mean, there was everybody was caricatured, and I realized that's what they were doing. And then it was fun to see an old movie come on TV and recognize who they were, And this Channel 40 all through the summer would have their own classic film festival, they called it. And so every night there was a new classic, like uber classic. And so there would be Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and Top Hat. There would be Casablanca. There would be Showboat. For some reason, by the time I was 10, I loved Showboat. I think the reason then was that there was a theater on a boat that went from town to town doing this melodrama play. We had a melodrama theater nearby in the neighboring town of Coloma. And so I knew what that was. So I thought it was so cool that this boat had a theater on it, and that's what enticed me. Later on as an adult, I grew to understand the importance of that story, its importance to Broadway, that score by Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein. I appreciated it in a whole other way when I grew up, but as a kid, I loved Showboat. And I loved Casablanca. And I loved Singing in the Rain. And I thought the Maltese Falcon was really interesting. And I liked the Fred and Ginger musicals. And I loved Abbott and Costello and the Marx Brothers and Mae West.
You were wonderful tonight.
I'm always wonderful at night.
And W.C. Fields and Charlie Chaplin. All these things. You just started getting into it because there wasn't anything else to watch. In the summer, the sitcoms were all on repeats, right? So you saw them all earlier in the year. And then comes this film festival on TV. Now, that channel got swallowed up by Fox. It became Fox 40 and had its own programming, and they retired doing all those repeats. But I was already hooked by the time that happened. And then VHS and DVDs were coming along, and you could start collecting these old movies, but you couldn't collect everything. Nope. Finally, TCM came along, and that's when I was a young adult in the 90s, and it was showing everything, plus the trailers, plus the short subjects, plus the serials. Oh, speaking of serials, when I was a kid, on PBS they had a show called Matinee at the Bijou. And it had old trailers, and then it had a newsreel, and then it had a short subject, and then it had a serial. And my brother and I loved Lost City of the Jungle, which was an inspiration for Indiana Jones movies. It was. You look at that thing and And then also we loved Flash Gordon, which is very clearly an inspiration for Star Wars in a way. So you can see the correlation there, and of course Star Wars and the Indiana Jones films were part of my growing up. And so I was seeing these old things and how they were relating to the new things that Steven Spielberg was doing. Of course, he had gone to the movies in the 50s and saw all this stuff, and was inspired by it. And I think across the board, all of these newer filmmakers, like when I was a teenager, who were coming along, like Spielberg and George Lucas, and we can even talk about Peter Jackson's love for this movie. King Kong was so important.
We're millionaires, boys. I'll share it with all of you. Why, in a few months it'll be up in lights on Broadway. Kong, the eighth wonder of the world!
science fiction fantasy author Ray Bradbury talks about how important King Kong, was to him. And certainly it's the beginning of Ray Harryhausen's output of those Sinbad movies and Clash of the Titans and all the stop motion creatures. But King Kong is still amazing. I mean, even though you can look at the special effects and say that they're old fashioned, they somehow work. I showed it to my students last year and they thought it was pretty darn cool. They appreciated the old timiness of it, but also they got into it. It's hard not to be sucked in to King Kong. And I think after The Wizard of Oz, King Kong was my gateway into classic films because, and it was black and white and didn't matter. Some kids will go, oh, it's in black and white, it's old. But you get past that. You start appreciating the beautiful black and white photography that's in Casablanca. The light and the shadow that you get. And of course, all the film noir movies that are really playing with that, or the brilliant stuff in, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, which I could not appreciate as a kid. I did see it, but I don't know if I saw it, until I was in my 20s. And I had a chance to see it at the local Crest Theater would show old movies all the time. And I think that's when I first saw Citizen Kane on the big screen, and I really appreciated it. So and by the way, love TCM. It's always going, and it introduces me to new things all the time. I mean, I will never see every movie ever made. I can't do it. But TCM, you can turn it on and something strange will come on and you'll get sucked in, and it's like, I've never seen this before. How interesting. This happens all the time. I even discover things that I probably should have already known, but I just hadn't gotten around to seeing them, or they haven't come my way, and then there they are, and I just catch it on TCM. I also love going out of my way even to an old movie palace that shows old movies. They might only do it once a month, or maybe they even do them all the time. But and right around me, I have the Tower Theater and the Crest Theater, which sometimes shows classic films. It's just they also do other things, and the Tower Theater shows first-run independent and foreign films, but they mix it in with, you get some Casablanca every now and then. You get an Alfred Hitchcock every now and then. I went to go see The Birds there last minute, and it was sold out. And the first-run movies, when I go there, they aren't sold out. There's 12 people there, but you play Casablanca, and it can fill up. The Birds can fill up. So I think that's pretty neat. I think people are still hungry for classic films, and there's always a new generation that hasn't seen them and can be introduced to them. And it's also kind of an endless supply of intriguing, fun, thought-provoking entertainment. And it's an interesting way to look back at the past and see a mirror of society of our past, But those are some of the reasons I love a classic film. And by the way, I go to the new movies all the time. I mean, 3 or 4 times a month, I'm in the movie theater. So I see everything. I see what's happening now. I'm not stuck in the past completely. But there's something that's really great, especially if you can go to an old movie palace and they still have the Wurlitzer organ playing, and there's a curtain, and it goes up or it opens up, and on comes that great old movie, whatever it is you've settled in to see. It's pretty great. It's pretty great.